Let's now look at the limitations and trade-offs of monetary policy. The first limitation of monetary policy is we say that consumption and investment might be interest rates inelastic. Interest rate inelastic is that we are saying that interest rates, consumption and investment are not responsive to interest rate changes. Now, why is this a limitation? Remember, monetary policy actually hinges very heavily on interest rates influencing consumption and investment, because you want to use a change in money supply to influence interest rate, then you use this interest rate to influence consumption and investment, then you use consumption and investment to influence aggregate demand. But there are actually many factors that influences consumption and investment, and interest rate is just simply one of the many factors that affect consumption and investment. So what happens here is that consumer and investors' expectations, whether they're feeling optimistic, whether they're feeling pessimistic. What if you cut interest rates, you're trying to encourage consumption investment, but people are feeling so pessimistic that, they say, even with a lower interest rate, I don't want to consume more, I don't want to invest more. In this case, we say that, okay, in your consumers and investors, they are not so motivated or driven by interest rate changes. In other words, they don't quite respond to interest rate changes. Then monetary policy would not be that useful a tool. So that is one of the key limitations of monetary policy. Another limitation is what we call a liquidity trap. This applies only to expansionary monetary policy. Now, remember, trying to increase money supply by open market operations, the main objective is to try to cut interest rate to influence C&I. Now, when you have a situation where interest rates are already zero or close to zero, you increase money supply where interest rates are at zero or close to zero, it cannot bring interest rate down any further. So this is where we say that, hey, you have a liquidity trap. A liquidity trap is a situation where your interest rates are already at zero or close to zero. If your interest rates are already at zero or close to zero, you carry out an increase in money supply, it doesn't bring interest rate down any further. So the policy instrument of interest rate is unable to influence C&I to increase anymore, because even if you change money supply, interest rate is not going to change. If it's already at zero or close to zero, it's not going to change. If it's not going to change any further, then how do you influence interest rate? If interest rate don't move, then how do you influence consumption investment to move? So we say that in the case of liquidity trap, your interest rate changes doesn't really quite happen anymore, so you can't actually bring about monetary policy to any use. Next, a small multiplier is also applicable only to expansionary monetary policy. This is a common consideration when using any form of expansionary demand management policy like monetary policy or fiscal policy. So if the country's multiplier is very small, so any increase in AD will not bring about a significant multiplier increase in aggregate demand, then it might not be a useful policy, as opposed to if a country had a large multiplier, any increase in AD will lead to a significantly large multiplier increase in real national income. So it's not that it's not going to work, but it's not going to work that well if your country have a very small multiplier. And lastly, we say that there is a time lag for monetary policy, but it comes in the form of transmission lag. So a time lag for monetary policy is quite different from the time lag of fiscal policy. In time lag of fiscal policy, if you go back to a previous video on fiscal policy, we say that they have this thing what I call implementation lag, where it takes time to plan, to implement, and there's a lot of political gridlock. That is in the case of fiscal policy. In the case of monetary policy, there is almost no implementation lag at all, which means to say if you decide that, hey, I want to carry out monetary policy, I want to change interest rate, it can be like that. So changing interest rate can be something that is as quick as for execution within a day. But so where does the time lag come for monetary policy? It comes in the form of transmission lag, which means to say that yes, we can change interest rate today, but when we change interest rates, how long does it actually take for consumers and investors to react to this interest rate change? Because why? Even if you change interest rate today, are your consumers going to go out and buy a car today just because the interest rates are lower? Even if you lower interest rates today, are investors going to go out and carry out new investments? They need time to plan, right? Purchases need time to plan, investment need time to plan. So this takes time. Okay, lastly, let's take a look at the trade-off matrix for monetary policy. This is very similar to fiscal policy. When you carry out expansionary monetary policy, what you may end up causing is that it may cause inflation and a worsening of balance of payment position. When you carry out contractionary monetary policy, you may end up causing higher unemployment and lowering economic